All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be volume 2 in a series that I started a while ago called White Liberals Pawn Black Liberals. And this edition is going to be featuring Mr. Mitch Landrieu, the former mayor of New Orleans, Louisiana, who recently was in the news for deciding that he was going to eradicate all of the statues depicting Confederate generals and Confederate high dignitaries that were scattered all throughout New Orleans. Of course, that was relatively controversial at the time, but it did not affect him because he is a staunch Caucasian liberal, aka a Democrat. But even with that terminology of a Democrat, there does have to be some differentiation or some distinction established because you have different levels within that party. You have liberals, you have super liberals, you have ardent Marxists, socialists, etc., so on and so forth. But one thing that I do want brothers to understand and to note about Mr. Mitch Landrieu is that he has a Jesuit background. For those of you who don't know, the Jesuit order is basically the military order, aka the intelligentsia of the Catholic Church. They're basically the CIA of the Catholic Church. And both he and his father, who also had a political career in the Louisiana area, have a Jesuit background. I'm going to be touching on the Jesuits in other videos, but it's very important to understand that the Jesuit order permeates most of the governments of the planet Earth. Their job is to make sure that the interests of the Catholic Church are always placed on the forefront. Many of your top actors, even athletes, but especially political figures, are pawns of the Jesuit order or agents of the Jesuit order. But just to get back to the point of this video, Mr. Mitch Landrieu is going to resort to certain tactics that are starting to become a theme within the quote-unquote Democratic Party, especially as it starts to become more and more apparent that if they allow Donald Trump to enter into the electoral process in 2020, they know that they're not going to win. So what the Democratic Party has done, they become so desperate. They do what the Democratic Party always does when they become desperate. They act as if they're concerned about the quote-unquote plight of the so-called black man and woman. And they make outlandish claims about things that they're going to change and reform, like the prison industrial complex, reparations, things of that sort. It basically is just another form of a pimp trying to bring his bottom bitch back under control by promising her the best drugs. That's all that is, because reparations is never going to happen, and I don't think that so-called black people truly understand what reparations means. Realistic reparations would mean that they would have to completely empty their vaults, but only after establishing if you truly came from a lineage of slavery. So once again, I'm going to explain this over the course of this video. But in order for them to truly enact reparations, they would have to go against the slave narrative that is so important in the psychological control of the so-called black man and black woman. And they're not going to do that. They have a lot invested in the notion that black equals slave and white or Caucasian equals master. And once they start to do that lineal check of your descent, they're going to have to tell certain black people, your forefather did not come from a line of slaves. Your forefather was a free black man, so we cannot give you any money. You're going to have Caucasians who they're going to have to tell, your grandmother was a slave 6 generations back, was a so-called black woman, by the way. You have a lot of people in this society today who are categorized as Caucasian and have no idea that their forefathers or foremothers were so-called black men or black women. So it's a much more nuanced discussion than a lot of people are truly ready to consider. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
All right, former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu helped lead the charge to remove Confederate statues in his city. Now he's leading an initiative that calls for a reckoning with the legacy of racism. The non-profit E Pluribus Unum works to achieve social and racial justice in the U.S.
No, what it seeks to achieve are the intents and the agenda of the Jesuit order. When you see terms like E Pluribus Unum or out of many one, that's the doctrine of Catholicism or universality.
The effort's name is taken, of course, from the U.S. motto that means out of many one.
Its first report, Divided by Design, interesting title, offers a comprehensive look at race and class issues in the South. Landrieu and his team talked to more than 800 people from 28 communities in 13 different states.
Brothers, I want you to pay very close attention when they show the still shots of Landrieu communicating with the quote-unquote various demographics of people that he claimed to interview. Pay very close attention to the still shots of who they depict he's conversing with. It is never going to be the so-called black male. They're always going to focus on the black female and the Caucasian male. They'll speak to the Caucasian female as well. But they understand the power of pictures. They never give the so-called black man the dignity and the respect of conversing with him. They always go to the so-called black female first because they're constantly trying to reinforce that she is the head of the household.
Joins us at the table to unpack what he found out. How did you decide where you were going and who you were going to talk to specifically?
I'm going to answer that question, but I'm stunned. I went to Peter Luger's for my honeymoon.
You did?
And it was spectacular.
Okay.
All right. For the record, I don't know who that guy is that wrote that review.
Brothers, it's very important for us to understand that our salvation will never come from a so-called white man. And it's nothing personal. But we have to save ourselves, and that starts by turning back to the Most High. That is how we're going to become organized and have our minds and spirits properly configured to prepare for the fall of this kingdom and the rejuvenation of our kingdom. That's the only way that these things are going to come to fruition. It's not going to come by looking towards others to save us. I believe it's Isaiah 52:3 that tells us that we shall be redeemed without money. Money is not what's going to salvage what we have left. There's going to be a great and cataclysmic event that occurs that is going to force our people to come together in the spirit of righteousness. Those of us who are left and those of us who are already preordained or predestined to make it out of the wreckage that's going to befall this global society, because this is modern day Babylon.
Not at all. Anyway, listen, we traveled across the South. It was terrific. We went to 28 different counties. We went to 13 different states. So we crisscrossed.
But who are the people that you talked to?
We talked to everybody. Everybody that is African American, white, educated, non-college educated.
First he says that we talk to everybody. Then he says we talk to everybody who's African American and white. Why is that? Because the race mongering is a very important aspect of what the quote unquote Democratic Party does. They pander to the lesser aspects of us as a people, because they know that in general our people have very low self-esteem, and like anyone with very low self-esteem, we'll take attention from anyone because we're constantly seeking to be validated by the so-called white man and woman, especially if they have a suit and tie on and they appear on TV and they claim to be a politician. That's why I state that in order for us to gain respect, respect starts from self-respect, and then we band together as a nation of people. But that has to occur one man at a time. There's not going to be any carnal salvation for our people here in America. In other words, what? There's never going to come a time where the so-called black man and woman are going to be in the place that the so-called white man and woman are in this society. This society has to be destroyed in the same way that Babylon was destroyed, in the same way that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Thus saith the scriptures. That's how it is going to occur.
We wanted to get on the ground and talk to and listen to people. We conducted over 800 interviews. Mm-hmm. Some of them lasted longer than a half an hour or 45 minutes, where we talked to individual people so that we can listen and hear and get out of this noise that you hear all the time from Washington, D.C. and get back on the ground.
And so you came up with divided by design. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Now, brothers, I'm not quite sure if you noticed it, but all the people that he was conversing with were either Caucasian males, Caucasian females, or black females. Let me rewind this back a little bit. Or let me specify, the segments of the interviews that they decided to show on the CBS Morning News highlighted conversations with the so-called black female, the so-called Caucasian male, and the so-called Caucasian female. Now, there's a young black boy right there in the right-hand portion of this screen, but he's not the focus of the conversation. The focus of the conversation is the so-called black female. Why is that? Because they understand that the female is not a threat. And a lot of people might not like me saying that, but it's the truth. You always deal with the woman once you've conquered a nation of people, because the woman is used not only as the perfect servant, but you can also use her as an intermediary to keep her own people in a certain position. And the so-called black woman does not understand, or is not willing to acknowledge that she understands that she's being used to subjugate her own people by constantly beating down her young men in the form of her sons. And even in the workplace, they like to make the so-called black woman the supervisor. Why is that? Once again, that reinforces that she should be a shot caller over men.
To get on the ground and talk to and listen to people. We conducted over 800 interviews. Mm-hmm. Some of them lasted longer than a half an hour or 45 minutes, where we talked to individual people so that we can listen and hear and get out of this noise that you hear all the time from Washington, D.C. and get back on the ground.
And so you came up with divided by design. What does that mean?
Yeah, well...
All divided by design means is that in order for you to maintain the power that you fought to attain, which is what the so-called Caucasian did when they first conquered incrementally America or the Americas, you have to make sure that you enact codes and laws to maintain the power that you were able to fight for your progeny, for your children. That's why it's unreasonable for the so-called black man and woman to believe that there's going to be some magical, mystical payout in the form of quote unquote reparations that's going to make everything right. It makes no sense whatsoever, especially when you understand that America does not have real money. It utilizes fiat currency. So they're not going to open the vault and give each and every so-called black person a check. That's not how it would work anyway. They would have to check your line or your lineage to verify if you even came from slaves. In the same way, when you go to school and they tell you all you black people were in slavery, watch how meticulous they would suddenly become if they were forced to enact any real form of reparations. I promise you, they will look at the darkest skinned Negro and tell him, we trace your lineage back or your ancestry back 7 generations. And your forefathers, your foreparents actually owned slaves. They actually owned Caucasians back in the early 1700s or late 1600s, which many so-called black people did, but they'll never tell you that because there's a narrative that they have to push and perpetuate to make sure that a lot of these young Caucasians here in America have a heightened belief in themselves. Most of these so-called Caucasians in America today are the descendants of white trash, believe it or not. Many of them came to America in the early to mid 1800s from many of these countries in Europe that have been decimated by a lot of the Marxist and communist revolutions of 1848, etc., when they were finally finishing their overthrow of many of the black monarchies and the black rulerships.
What it means is that there is a big difference the way people see the world. Everybody wants equal opportunity for themselves. They want their kids to have a better life. But the African-American community views the obstacles very differently from the white community.
As they should, because this is our captivity. This is not our rest. Things are not supposed to go our way here. If we want to improve our condition, it starts from within, and it starts from how willing we are to work with one another. But there are going to have to be baby steps taken, and there's going to have to be very sharp analysis that is executed, as opposed to the emotion that is constantly being utilized by the quote-unquote black female leadership or black matriarchy that just leaves us behind. Groups like Black Lives Matter, etc., their true intention is to push homosexuality, lesbianism, and transgenderism on the so-called black community and to once again marginalize the so-called black man. They only use your plight, so-called black man, to make you think that they're in your corner. Their true goal is to keep you in that corner, not be in your corner. They do not care about you. These so-called woke black activist groups, they're only using you for manpower. That's it. Their true goal is to utilize Trojan horse mechanisms to make you think that they're your friend, for you to welcome them in, and then to finally just put some type of crazy looking black female pansexual transgender person on the throne to tell you what to do. Meanwhile, they're going to continue to encourage your young sons to join gangs and sell drugs to one another. Go to prison. You'll just become a stock option. That's what it's about. They're never going to truly change the prison industrial complex because that's a multi-billion-dollar financial enterprise for them. So what we have to be focusing on is extricating ourselves spiritually and mentally from this place and stop always trying to immerse ourselves in the furtherance of whatever you call this society. We have to be in this society, not of it.
White folks that responded to the survey think that racism is just an individual act of malice to another person that looks different from them. African Americans say that's not our experience. That's
how it's supposed to be. Two different people, two different perspectives. So-called black people have to stop pushing so-called Caucasians to try to understand our plight. How could they? It makes no sense. We just moved past a storyline where there was great scrutiny placed on LeBron James for seemingly not having the empathy that you would expect someone who claimed to be a global transformative figure to have for the issues that are transpiring in China. And I had no problem with LeBron James not caring because he's not Asian, he's not Chinese. You would expect him to be more in league and in line with what's going on with his people. My issue with him is that he's an actor.
Accept that as a form of racism because they feel it every day. They say the institutions that we have are still baked with institutional designs. And so the point is the country is the way it is because we designed it this way.
Right.
And so if we want a different outcome, we have to redesign it. So criminal justice.
Well, this society is not going to be redesigned. You know that and I know that. So knock it off.
Reform, for example, would fit into this. education reform, how you gerrymander legislative districts, et cetera, et cetera.
But Mitch, how do you advance this conversation? Because to get to those things you talk about, you have to get support from the white community to do it.
Yeah, there's no question.
And that's never going to happen. Why would a Caucasian man and a Caucasian woman say to themselves, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take some of the opportunities that we have and divest them over to so-called black people en masse. That's never going to happen. Now, are you going to have individual Caucasians who suffer from quote-unquote white guilt, who are willing to help an individual so-called black boy or girl so that they feel better about themselves? Of course. But in mass, they're not going to do that. When you understand the real history of the so-called Caucasian, as well as the real histories of all the nations of the earth, it's much more understandable why they are the way that they are. It's in their DNA that they come from an environment that they do not want to go back to. They do not want to go back to the caves of Western Asia / Eastern Europe. They're done with that. They've ascended to the throne. They're living out the prophecy of riches, of the fat of the land that was given to Esau in Genesis, the 27th chapter. And they're not going to give it up without a fight.
The first thing that has to happen is people need to get to know each other, spend time with each other, see each other's humanity, and you have to do this on the ground. You have to do it family to family, neighborhood to neighborhood, church. The
most important thing is that each and every so-called black person see humanity within themselves and within one another. We have so many problems intra-racially. A lot of these interracial discussions are really only used as red herrings to distract the so-called black man from the real problems that we have.
Urge team to team and community to community.
But you heard many white people say, listen, this happened. How can you hold us accountable for something that happened 150 years ago?
No question about it.
And they're correct, Gail King. And a lot of people are not going to like me saying that. The so-called Caucasian is not supposed to feel like they should be held responsible for something that their ancestors did. That's not their job as an individual. Now, when these prophecies come to fruition, we have to understand that the Most High raises up people as a nation and he takes them down as a nation. So the Most High is going to take care of the current rulership. It's not incumbent upon the average so-called Caucasian to say, you know what, you're right. Even though I'm the descendant of white trash, I'm going to give you all of my natural resources, all of my goods, all of my assets so that we can even things out. That's never been done in history. That's never going to be done. A lot of so-called black people say, well, what about the Jewish people? They got reparations. No, they didn't. What the so-called Jewish people received were their own funds back from their own Jewish elite bankers so that they could start the state of Israel to fulfill prophecy. That's it. A lot of this other nonsense that so-called black people talk about when it comes to reparations is nonsense. The Jewish people literally paid themselves.
Mr. Reparations, what would you say?
The way that we talk about this is just, listen, it may not be your fault, but it is certainly your responsibility. So in the last segment, you had climate change. You know what the impact's going to be in a couple years, demographic changes. If we don't get together across race and class, the chances of us dealing with those complicated issues that are going to stress us, it's going to make the country worse. And finally,
in other words, he understands that this society is a sinking ship, so all hands on deck. That's all it's about. And another reason that reparations is never going to occur is that so-called black people keep holding on to this title of black. You cannot repair or reimburse a skin color. You can only reimburse someone who understands their tribal lineage. So many people will say, well, what about the Native Americans? They've received a certain degree of reparations. Well, really, no, they haven't. But beyond that, they still understand the importance of their tribe. They don't go according to corporate lingo like so many so-called blacks of the captivity do.
The reason we use e pluribus unum is because the founding fathers from our origin said, out of many we are one.
And beyond that, you're a Jesuit.
Now, the good thing about the poll is that everybody thinks that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And, of course, that issue is being challenged on the national level. On the ground in America, most people in the South that responded to this survey like the fact that they live around it. But we're kind of segregated in isolation right now.
Brothers, let me state this very quickly. When you read Genesis, the 11th chapter, we're told the story of the Tower of Babel. That's the same energy that is transpiring in America and in Western civilization, where they believe that diversity strengthens a society. And to a degree it does, because you're giving contributions from various races, but you're also weak. That's why the scriptures tell us, I believe in Daniel, the 2nd chapter, round about verse 41 or 42 that the kingdom will be partly strong and partly broken. Is because when you intermix all of these various forces and factions, yes, you're going to get the best of the nations, but at the slightest tremor, that tenuous unity is going to be broken and everyone's going to go back to their own people. And that's what we're going to see is going to transpire over a course of time in this society. That's why you see the media keeps trying to play this up. And once again, it's very important that the so-called black man understand his importance. We must understand our importance to ourselves, one another, and over our families. Because when these things start to go down, you're going to see how big of a hypocrite and an actress the so-called strong black woman is and has always been. She's going to start looking around for men. All these same big mouth that you see on social media talking all this shit, she's going to be looking for the first man to sidle up next to. And there's not going to be any arguing in that day and things of that nature.
To work our way out of that if we want to be strong and be the country that we all say we aspire to be.
Many of these issues come up in the Democratic primary race for president here, and I know you said you're not going to run in 2020, but I'm curious, if someone asked you to be vice president, would you be interested?
No.
Oh, really?
No. I'm going to let them...
Brothers, once again, I'm completely apolitical, but the so-called Democratic Party is so done, they're so finished, it's laughable.
I don't believe you either.
I don't believe you.
We'll talk later, Peter Luke.
The reason why I say that they're done is because right now they're going through a conundrum where they're trying to figure out exactly where they want their party to go. It's very difficult to be a quote-unquote moderate Democrat today because the more extreme aspects of that political branch have been taken over by socialists / Marxists, and everything with them is to promote and provoke as much chaos as possible. That's why you see a lot of those chicks like from the House of Representatives, what they call the squad. They're always all over social media, and they're actually jealous of Trump. That's why they keep going back and forth with him. They're trying to play out this divine feminine versus divine masculine war through politics. And I'm going to be touching on that more because brothers asked me about this whole Trump impeachment process, and that's really all it's about. It's about a war between the divine feminine and the divine masculine that they're trying to play out on the political stage. But just getting back to the point, the Democratic Party, they're very scared right now because they know that they have to return more towards a middle of the road viewpoint. But in order to do so, they're going to have to silence a lot of the extremists that have entered their party in the last 4 years. A lot of super liberal female Marxist / socialist extremists have entered the Democratic Party in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's really messing up their whole quote unquote swag.
I love that steak.
Yes.
You opted not to, as we mentioned, you're not running. You've been very supportive of former Vice President Joe Biden. Are you still a fan?
Well, I haven't endorsed anybody yet, but people have asked me, and I think he is our best chance to do what I think the country really wants to do, which...
No, let's be for real. Joe Biden is your only chance to win the quote-unquote election / selection.
...in a corner and have a new president so that we can reclaim what America really is supposed to be.
What do you think of his campaign so far?
I think people that are worried about it are more worried. I think he's doing fine. Think about it. He's been out...
There is no Joe Biden campaign because he has nothing to say. What he's running on is that he's an older white male. People understand pretty much, when I say people, I'm talking about within the Democratic Party, that their only chance is Joe Biden because they're hoping that they can offset Trump's older white maleness with Joe Biden's older white maleness. I mentioned this in previous videos. The reason why the mainstream liberal media is so upset with Donald Trump is because after Barack Obama became president, everybody thought that they could become president. Women, homosexuals, they all said to themselves, wow, they put a nigger in the White House. Of course, they didn't verbalize that, but that's what they were thinking in their mind. Because once again, the super liberals, they're just as quote unquote racist as the so-called conservatives are. They just don't verbalize it as easily. But I promise you, black women, white women, homosexuals, lesbians, they said to themselves, they put Barack Obama in the White House, that means I definitely can get in. So when Hillary ran and she was not put into the White House and they put Donald Trump in there, they said, oh, hell no. They were really offended because they said, damn, a nigger has a better chance of getting in the White House than a woman does. That's really what they're spazzing out about, and that's why they're playing out this divine masculine versus divine feminine ritual for the last 3 years. And they're going to become very embarrassed again, especially if they're not able to push Trump out of that throne, because he's going to win again.
He's gotten everything but the kitchen sink thrown at him from everybody. He's still standing, he's still leading, he's still doing well. It's a long campaign. There are lots of candidates. From my perspective, any one of them would be exponentially better than what we have right now. And given what you're seeing in Washington today, the country wants to make a change, and I think they will.
What do you think about the lieutenant colonel who testified yesterday, highly credentialed, and now he's being attacked as someone
I think that
who's not patriotic?
Here's the thing. At some point in time, the senators need to put their country above their party. And
well, that's never going to happen. The senators are just like any other gang. They're true to their blue or they're true to their red. Just like Bloods, Crips, any other clique. They're not going to cross party lines. People have to understand this. America is pretty much separated into cliques and gangs. The fire department is a gang. The police are a gang. EMTs are a gang. Politicians are gangs too.
Information that's coming out from people who are Republicans that were appointed by the president that served this country honorably and actually were wounded, who themselves are very credible people, should be given great weight. Impeachment is a very sobering thing. It should be handled that way, and the Congress should do their duty. The American people are smart enough to figure this out over time.
Yes, that's part of the problem. The American people are smart enough to figure this out. And the idiocy of the Democratic Party makes Trump look more realistic than anyone else. That's the problem that you guys are having. That's why you're trying to force these impeachment proceedings.
The other impeachment process that Nixon went through took a long, long period of time. So I think walking through this very soberly, but to attack somebody's credibility like he or the ambassador that testified, they're very credible witnesses, and their stories ring true from anybody that's ever served on a jury, and I've served too. It sounds pretty credible that they were able to see and hear and know what occurred, and then their stories make sense. So let the evidence fall where it...
What you're saying does not even sound like grounds for real impeachment. You sound like someone who's desperate. Once again, anyone who's paying close enough attention should be able to discern that right now this society is circling the drain. That's why, once again, so-called black men, we have to rally together and cut the bullshit out. Focus on ourselves and one another. That's what counts. You have to be the head over your family, over your lady, over your children. That's what counts. Now, all of this nonsense about coming together with everybody, these other nations do not want to come together with you, nor should they. They're making too much money pimping you. They're opening businesses in your neighborhoods and doing what they want. Why would they want to come together with you? Especially in light of the fact that our people have no real culture.
Don't malign this man's character who bled for our country.
There was one thing from your report that I thought was interesting, where you said talent is equally distributed, but opportunity isn't.
That did not come from me. That came from high school students in Louisville, Kentucky, who looked at me and said, Mr. Mayor, we're out here, we're working hard, we're all good, we're smart, but we can't get ahead. Talent out here is equally distributed, but our opportunities are not. And if the country could just stay focused.
Well, I would take a conversation like that more seriously if he stated that he was having it with people who were 25, 26 years old as opposed to high school students. How many opportunities are going to be available for a high school student? So I'm not quite sure if that makes that much sense.
On that, so that everybody has equal opportunity and everybody has a fair shot. We've got a chance as a country to get where we say we want to be.
Thank you for nudging our...
Brothers, the concept of fairness and equality is only going to go so far. If you're a so-called black man and you have a business, I would assume that you would have an eye more towards empowering and employing your own people than other people. So we cannot expect differently from other races. They're going to have a preference for their own.
Focus in that direction.
Sure.
Landrieu,
Great to see you.
appreciate it. Some of the
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see how things go with the quote-unquote electoral process as well as the impeachment process, because I do believe that they're going to try to have Trump impeached, and we'll see how that goes. But when it comes to reparations, brothers, do not buy the banana in the tailpipe. It's not realistic. And if they were to truly try to initiate a reparations process, there would be so much dirt that will come out on so much dirty laundry that got aired out about the true history of this country. It would just not be worth their while. It would tear apart the fabric of this society. But anyway, peace.